Has Russia just scored a major breakthrough outside of Bakhmut? And are Ukrainian forces going to have to start their withdrawal from the city? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's February 19th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first and foremost, when we look at the control map, the biggest change here, and they're saying the enemy is breaking through the line at Berkiva Yagdine. And you can see here, it's mapped like this, with probably the largest gains to Russian, fastest rather, gains to Russian-controlled territory that we've seen in some time. As we talked about with the fall of Peresko Kivka, that Ukrainian forces probably had their best bet of using this line here, this roadway, as a sort of natural barrier that could form a defensive position. But as you can see, Russian forces continue to advance and have blown past the Ukrainian forces' efforts to set a defensive line. And what makes this so dangerous is that, as you can see here, there isn't really, once you achieve a breakthrough, the danger is that it becomes very hard to stop. This is how the Kharkiv offensive was so effective. You need to reconsolidate defensive lines. You have to think that Ukrainian forces, are spread across the front lines of Bakhmut here, but now suddenly they need to reconstitute somewhere in this region in order to mount a defense and stop Bakhmut from being cut off entirely. Now, how does one do that? Well, this is sort of the tough part. You can see there's not a ton of natural barriers to work with. One may be this river or canal here that can be hard to cross, right? Usually armored vehicles can't get across this sort of thing. So you may have this sort of gap here that you can try to have your forces plug. That would be my best bet, is to try to keep these lines intact, swing them in a controlled withdrawal back, and use this, and this as a new front line. But you can see how incredibly still surrounded Bakhmut will be, how much pressure the city will be under. And as we've talked about for literally weeks, maybe even months on this channel, Bakhmut has symbolic value to the Russians. That's why they have expended way too much of their combat power trying to take it. It is not that to Ukrainian forces, and Ukrainian forces need to understand that when it no longer becomes cost effective to eliminate Russian forces there, to exterminate Russian combat power, they need to conduct a controlled withdrawal and consider the defense of Bakhmut to have been successful. This is especially in the wake of the fact that Ukrainian forces are really going to be pivoting to the offense in the coming weeks. That by doing so, they're going to preserve their combat power and some of their most seasoned troops to contribute to their next offensive. Again, this is one of those things, this is one of those moments where I think Ukrainian forces have to make the hard but correct call. And again, I'm here as an independent analyst. I don't have a side that I favor in my coverage, and this is just the call that I think Ukrainian forces have to make right now. Russia, of course, as we also have talked about, I believe it's likely that they have reserve elements and they're going to be exploiting this breakthrough as to the absolute maximum extent possible. It's not the Western strategy, and it's not clear that Russia has robust reserve capabilities remaining. But if they do, whatever they have is going to be pouring into this gap, conducting, again, what we call exploitation. When we look at the combat map, you can see, and we're going to talk about why in a minute, but there's no combat action outside of Donetsk and very limited combat action at this Davorichna, but where most the overwhelming lion's share of the fighting is happening is in Bakhmut. You can see here they haven't yet reported this Yadine Berkiva breakthrough, but it seems highly possible. You guys can see that this map depicts it as being quite a bit tougher terrain than we saw previously, intercut by railroads, some marshlands, but it also reminds us just how effective a good defensive line along this natural barrier can be. You can see this marshlands here. Again, if it's marshy, armored vehicles can get across it usually. But if it's a proper year-round river, this dotted line means usually intermittent river. If it's a permanent river, it's probably precluding many armored vehicles from crossing. So that's again where they should really think about. But I want to point out that again, you got Kreminna, Lyman, all these other areas where Russia's throwing its combat power, and it's not delivering decisive effects. Again, I'm not here to tell you that breaking through Ukrainian lines is anything other than a potential bellwether for the withdrawal from Bakhmut. I think it should be a sign that it's time to begin a controlled withdrawal from Bakhmut and establish a new defensive line, probably outside of Chasiv Yar and Ivansky. Let's talk a little bit, though, about why the weird silence in the south. Well, things are getting a little convoluted. The Russian Ministry of Defense is, of course, trying to lock down and gain better control over the disparate forces that are fighting this war. Oftentimes, they don't even recognize each other's command authority. The Wagner Group is a good example of one who considers themselves separate from and often critical of the Ministry of Defense. Less clear is the relationship between the Russian MOD and the DNR and LNR. The DNR and LNR spokesperson, Edward Basurin, has actually been let go following a wave of criticisms of the militia and the Russian Ministry of Defense. But what's more interesting is that the same mill blogger who's reporting this is also reporting that the Russian defense establishment wants to replace all commanders from the DNR and LNR militias with professional Russian officers as part of a formal reorganization of the DNR and LNR militias under the MOD. And this is where sort of the debate splits. Many Russian mill bloggers believe that even though these militia commanders are not trained, do not have formal military education, understand military basic functions, or understand how to navigate the Russian bureaucracy, or meet the physical fitness requirements, they said this is still purging combat-proven leaders and it's going to undercut support for the Russian military establishment among the DNR LNR. Prigozhin has said he will meet with DNR commanders to discuss his dismissal and stated that the news must be some kind of fake propaganda because the DNR and LNR commanders firing them would be unacceptable. So I suspect now the other side of the coin is that Institute for the Study of War assesses that the DNR and LNR's 1st and 2nd Army Corps are not and have never been a professional or even an effective fighting force. Russian proxies couldn't capture ground during the initial invasion in 2014, required reinforcements from the conventional Russian military in 2015, and they still haven't been exactly an effective fighting force in 2022. They say this is indicative of valuing ideological commitment to the DNR and LNR ideology over military professionalism, competence, and fighting effectiveness. And this is an interesting assessment, right? We'll pull up this map here, because you can't deny that they have made some marginal gains outside Marinka, right? You remember months and months ago, the airport was not yet contested. So there has been extremely limited and extremely costly forward gains outside of Donetsk City, where I think of the DNR and LNR as classically operating. There's also, of course, some rumors that they are deployed along this Kreminna-Savote line, but when we look at where these forces operate, it's tough to say. As there's one thing we've seen, it's that combat experience. I can tell you that the best the best commanders have layers, right? They are just like a good CEO, right? If you wanted a good CEO, what would their resume look like? Well, they would start in business they would go to undergrad and get a business degree or an econ degree or an accounting degree. They would start in a role. They would spend several years in that role getting real world experience. Then they would go get their MBA, right, where they would help understand sort of the theoretical vision behind the next level. Then they would become a mid-level executive, right? Then you would see them start to rise through the executive ranks. Maybe they would take some more specific courses on their particular industry, manufacturing, technology, whatever. But that gets into like seminars, masterminds, mentorships. And so what you see is in good careers, to maximize the effectiveness of a leader, they need a combination of practical experience in the field, in this case in combat, and you have to have the theoretical underpinnings that let you sort of see the instructions of how the watch works. And if you combine those two, you get a leader of maximum effectiveness. The next most effective is a professional soldier who trains and gets formal schooling in sort of the theory. And then finally, you have at the very bottom sort of the unorganized militia fighter commanders of unorganized militia. And the reason the unorganized militia tend to do badly is that, if you have no idea, it's sort of like engineering, right? If you could build a bridge with no math, with no engineering background, with no knowledge of the theory, but your flaws in that bridge building technique are never going to get repaired, right? Your bad bridges will just sort of stay bad. Or if you try to learn something, it's going to have to be iterative and it's going to be very costly. And it's not even clear that what you learn is going to be effective, right? If your bridge collapses, it might be because you use the wrong materials. But you may think you can solve it by just sticking more, boards underneath it, right? Do you see how without theoretical underpinnings, you might not understand how to solve the problems in front of you, and you might come up with solutions that either are counterproductive, wasteful, nonsensical, or not even realize you've made a serious error, right? The classic, if you've ever seen any of the fighting from Syria, you can see how frequently these units would move in formation with no security, no real formation. They're just like people walking in a line. No one's really paying attention to the world around them. They're only going to react if someone attacks them first. And then oftentimes they simply get attacked and take significant casualties. And they never really think about, well, why did that happen? Could we have prevented it by using a formation or tactics or communication or reconnaissance or just 360 degrees of security? And if you never think about like amateurs just don't usually go through that learning process. All this to say that there is, if your goal is to create the best officer, you would probably take those DNR and LNR officers, pull them from the front lines. This is actually what the Brazilians did for their local police forces in a lot of their favelas. They would come in. They would have their highly professional national police force come in, and they would become the police for the neighborhood X. Meanwhile, the local police leaders would be pulled offline, and they would be given formal schooling and training in law and modern tactics and professionalism. And then the police force would be deployed out and switched back, now being better trained and better able to operate in those areas. That's what they probably should do, is say, hey, listen, we're going to put a wave of professional Russian officers in to run these units. Your leaders are going to be taken back into Russia. They're going to go through some formal schooling on command and control and Russian military logistics, and maybe you'll start to see why you have the problems that you have. But then you got to put them back on the line, because why would you waste all that practical experience? It doesn't make any sense. But if there's one thing we've known Russia can't do, it's manage personnel effectively. So I wouldn't exactly hold my breath for a better personnel management plan to come out of this conflict. Anyway, guys, if you want to check out the combat video breakdowns, you know the ones I'm talking about, all the viral videos, especially, for example, there's recently the viral video of a lone Ukrainian soldier defending a trench fortification from a Russian assault, and he is just handed weapon after weapon from his buddy, picking up guns and RPGs and grenades like it's Call of Duty, just picking them up off the ground. It's pretty wild. I do all those breakdowns, not here because YouTube won't let me. I do them on the Patreon. Thanks so much to my Colonel and Lieutenant tier patrons, especially ECT 1978 or EC 1978, Predator 7R, Judith Haynes, our Colonel tier patrons, all our Lieutenant tier patrons, and you for watching. Links in the description of the Patreon. Catch you guys later.